April 5, 1815. A mountain in Indonesia exploded with the force of thousands of nuclear bombs. The sound was heard over 1,200 miles away. The ash cloud reached 28 miles into the sky, but the explosion was just the beginning. Over the next 3 years, the sun dimmed across the entire planet. Temperatures dropped worldwide. Crops failed. Snow fell in July. In Europe, they called it the year without summer. In China, summer never came at all. At least 71,000 people died in the initial eruption. But in the years that followed, over 100,000 more would starve to death. This is the story of Mount Tambora, the volcano that changed the world's climate and killed more people than any other eruption in recorded history. Mount Tambora sits on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia, part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped belt of volcanoes circling the Pacific Ocean. Before 1815, Tambora stood over 14,000 feet tall, one of the tallest peaks in the Indonesian archipelago. Its slopes were covered in lush tropical forests. Small kingdoms thrived in the valleys below, growing rice and spices. The local people knew the mountain was a volcano, but it had been silent for centuries, so long that no one alive remembered it ever erupting. They had no idea what was coming. In 1812, 3 years before the catastrophe, Tambora began to wake up. Small earthquakes rattled the region. Steam vents opened on the mountain's flanks. The air smelled of sulfur, but these warning signs were subtle. Life continued as normal in the villages below. Then, on April 5, 1815, everything changed. At 7 p.m. on April 5th, Mount Tambora erupted. The initial explosion was so loud it was heard in Sumatra, over 1,200 miles away. People there thought it was cannon fire from a distant battle. But this was just the beginning. For the next 5 days, Tambora continued to erupt. Each explosion was more violent than the last. On April 10th, the volcano reached its peak. At 7 p.m., Tambora exploded with a force equivalent to 800 megatons of TNT, roughly 60,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The eruption column shot 28 miles into the stratosphere, higher than any commercial airplane flies today. Pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas, ash, and rock moving at 450 miles per hour, raced down the mountain slopes, incinerating everything in their path. Entire villages were wiped out in seconds. The heat was so intense that people were incinerated before they could scream. The ashfall was apocalyptic. Within a 400-mile radius, the sky turned completely black for 2 days. People couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. Sir Stamford Raffles, the British governor in Java, wrote in his diary, "The explosions were heard distinctly at Batavia, a distance of 900 miles. The sky was covered with a black cloud, and a shower of ashes fell, which covered the ground to the depth of several inches. But the horror wasn't over. The eruption triggered massive tsunamis. Waves up to 13 feet high slammed into nearby islands, drowning thousands. When the eruption finally stopped on April 15th, Mount Tambora had lost over 4,000 feet of its height. The top of the mountain had simply vanished, leaving behind a massive crater 4 miles wide. The death toll on Sumbawa and neighboring islands was catastrophic. At least 71,000 people died, 12,000 directly from the eruption, and 59,000 more from starvation and disease in the months that followed. Entire kingdoms were erased. The language and culture of the Tambora people, who lived on the mountain slopes, were completely lost. Not a single person survived to pass on their traditions. But the true global catastrophe was only just beginning. When Tambora erupted, it injected over 24 cubic miles of rock, ash, and gas into the atmosphere. But more importantly, it released 60 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. This sulfur dioxide combined with water vapor to create tiny droplets of sulfuric acid. These droplets formed a thin veil around the entire planet, reflecting sunlight back into space. For 3 years, the Earth's temperature dropped by an average of 1 degree Fahrenheit. That might not sound like much, but it was enough to change the world. The year 1816 became known as the year without summer. In New England, snow fell in June. Frost killed crops in July and August. There was ice on lakes in Pennsylvania in the middle of summer. A farmer in Vermont wrote in his diary, June 6th, very cold. Corn and garden things nearly destroyed by frost. July 9th, ice as thick as window glass. August 20th, frost destroyed nearly all the corn. Across Europe, the situation was even worse. The summer of 1816 was the coldest on record. Temperatures dropped so low that crops failed across the continent. In Switzerland, the harvest was destroyed. Grain prices skyrocketed. Bread became unaffordable for ordinary people. Riots broke out in France and Germany. Desperate families slaughtered their livestock just to survive the winter. Typhus and cholera spread through malnourished populations. In Ireland, a famine killed tens of thousands. In China, the monsoon rains failed. The Yangtze River region, normally one of the most fertile areas in the world, suffered catastrophic crop failures. Summer never arrived. The cold killed the rice harvest. Famine spread across southern China. In the province of Yunnan, desperate people resorted to eating bark, grass, and clay just to survive. Historians estimate that over 100,000 people worldwide died from starvation and disease caused by the climate disruption. The eruption of Mount Tambora killed more people than any other volcanic eruption in recorded history. But the catastrophe also had unexpected consequences. In the summer of 1816, a group of English writers gathered at a villa on Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Among them were the poet Lord Byron and an 18-year-old woman named Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, who would later become Mary Shelley. They had planned to spend the summer sailing and enjoying the Swiss countryside. But the weather was terrible. Dark clouds covered the sky. It rained almost every day. They were trapped indoors. To pass the time, Byron proposed a challenge. Each of them would write a ghost story. On that dark, cold summer night, caused by volcanic ash halfway around the world, Mary Shelley began writing Frankenstein. One of the most famous horror novels ever written was a direct result of Tambora's eruption. The eruption also changed history in other ways. In New England, the failed harvests of 1816 convinced thousands of farmers that the land was cursed. They abandoned their farms and migrated west, settling in Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. This westward migration accelerated American expansion and changed the demographics of the United States. The volcanic ash in the atmosphere created spectacular sunsets for years after the eruption. The British painter J.M.W. Turner captured these vivid red and orange skies in his paintings. Art historians believe Tambora's sunsets influenced an entire generation of romantic landscape artists. But perhaps the most important consequence was scientific. The year without summer forced scientists to realize that climate could change dramatically in a very short time. It led to the birth of modern meteorology and climate science. For the first time, researchers began to understand that events on one side of the world could affect the entire planet. Tambora taught humanity that we all live under the same sky. Today, scientists understand exactly how Tambora changed the world's climate. When the volcano erupted, it didn't just send ash into the air. It injected sulfur dioxide gas into the stratosphere, the layer of atmosphere 10 to 30 miles above Earth's surface. At that altitude, the sulfur dioxide reacted with water vapor to form tiny droplets of sulfuric acid, each about 1 micrometer in diameter, smaller than a human hair. These droplets spread around the entire planet within months. Carried by high-altitude winds, they formed a reflective veil that bounced sunlight back into space before it could warm the Earth. The result was a global temperature drop of about 1 degree Fahrenheit. But in some regions, especially the northern hemisphere during summer, temperatures dropped by as much as 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. That was enough to freeze crops, delay monsoons, and trigger famines worldwide. Scientists can still see evidence of Tambora's eruption today. Ice cores drilled from glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica contain a distinct layer of volcanic ash and sulfur from 1815-1816. Tree rings from that period show unusually slow growth, confirming the cold temperatures. Today, we monitor volcanoes around the world using satellites, seismographs, and gas detectors. If another eruption the size of Tambora happened today, we would have weeks or even months of warning. But we still couldn't stop it. And the scary truth is, Tambora wasn't even the largest eruption in human history. Mount Tambora's eruption was massive. but it was only a 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a scale that goes up to 8. A VI8 eruption, called a supervolcano, is 10 times more powerful than Tambora. The last VI8 eruption was 26,500 years ago in New Zealand. It ejected 280 cubic miles of material, more than 10 times what Tambora produced. Today, scientists monitor several supervolcano sites around the world. Yellowstone in the United States, Toba in Indonesia, the Campi Flegrei caldera near Naples, Italy. Any of these could erupt again, and if they did, the consequences would be global. A supervolcano eruption today would darken the skies for years, collapse global agriculture, trigger mass starvation, possibly even threaten human civilization. In 1815, the world's population was about 1 billion people. Most lived in small, self-sufficient communities. Today, we have 8 billion people, and we depend on global supply chains for food, medicine, and energy. A Tambora-scale eruption today would be catastrophic. A supervolcano would be apocalyptic. But there is hope. Scientists are developing early warning systems. Engineers are exploring ways to reduce volcanic risk. And climatologists are modeling how we might adapt to sudden climate change. We can't prevent volcanic eruptions, but we can prepare for them. The lessons of 1815 still matter today. Today, Mount Tambora is quiet. The mountain has rebuilt itself to about 9,350 feet, still nearly 5,000 feet shorter than it was before 1815. People live on its slopes again. They farm the rich volcanic soil. Life has returned to Sumbawa. But the mountain is not dead. It is only sleeping. Geologists estimate that Tambora erupts every 5,000 years or so. The last major eruption was in 1815, which means we have about 3,185 years before it happens again. The eruption of Mount Tambora killed at least 71,000 people directly. Another 100,000 died from the climate catastrophe that followed. It was the deadliest volcanic eruption in recorded history. But more than that, it was a warning. It showed us that our planet's climate is fragile, that events on one side of the world can affect the entire globe, that nature's power far exceeds our control. In 1815, a mountain in Indonesia blocked out the sun for 3 years. Snow fell in summer. Crops died. People starved. And the world learned that we are all connected under the same sky. Mount Tambora erupted on April 10, 1815. At least 71,000 people died directly from the eruption. The global climate disruption caused an estimated 100,000 additional deaths from famine and disease. It remains the deadliest volcanic eruption in recorded history.